Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our Royal Ranger podcast. We're excited to be with you in a brand new year, 2026. So that's always an exciting thing. This is going to be a big year for Royal Rangers. And as you are, anyway, you'll hear more as we go on forward. But today's topic, we thought we would launch into something that probably everybody's thinking about at the first of the year. And that's goals and all of that. Really, we're not going to so much talk about, these will be goals, but our topic is leading ourselves as we move into the brand new year. And that's something we probably need to be doing. Don't you think, John?
Absolutely. I know I need some leadership. So.
Are you supposed
Guidance,
to be leading?
counseling.
There you go.
Don't know
all of those areas. So as we talk about leading ourselves, really in this episode, and we know we're not going to be able to dive deep in each of these areas. And really, this is just to get you thinking. And hopefully, as you come out of this podcast here in the next 20 minutes or so, then you will just, give you some launching points, if you will. But three areas really we want to focus on today. And that's leading ourselves, our personal lives, leading who we are. Number two is leading our family. And then number three, of course, is leading our time, our schedule, our calendars. All of those things, if we're not intentional about those, somebody else will do those. And so we want to make sure that we feel that these are really, really important for us and kind of where we want to go. And John's so good at all three of those. So he's of course, you guys know John.
Oh, wait, sorry, I was sleeping. What was that?
That's because you don't do your time, right? So anyway, as we jump into this, because we don't have a lot of time today, but number one, I'm talking about personal. We always say in Royal Rangers, you can't take a boy where you're not going yourself.
Yep.
Or you can't take someone where you're not going your own self. And so as we look at the new year, I think one of the first things that we really ought to look at ourselves is how are we developing ourselves? Mm-hmm. In what area are we promoting ourselves? My social media leading up to the first of the year, it just was blowing up with all kinds of self-help, self-improvement, whether it was they were trying to sell me some kind of gym equipment, or the one that I've seen a lot is on AI. 28 days to master AI, and you can sign up for $9.99 a day or whatever it is, kind of a thing. But that's a big deal. We've always got to be growing. Because really in our lives, don't you think, John, there's never really a neutral position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of like, life is kind of like paddling down the creek. If you're not paddling, the current's going to take you somewhere anyway.
Yeah.
So you got to be active in the process of growing and guiding what you're doing and what your plans are, or else, like you said, something else is going to take you there.
Right.
So that's important.
Yeah. So we need to be kind of always moving forward. So one of the things, of course, right now is mentally. So as we look at that, I was thinking, there's four areas really. The first one would be mentally. What am I reading? What am I listening to? Whether it's podcasts. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, this is one that's stimulating you mentally. But what are we doing to improve our mental game? And so therefore, there's always that study part and all of that. The second one would be our physical. Mm-hmm. How am I improving, or how am I in my personal life on my physical? Of course, exercising. I don't want to admit this, but as time progresses, I've been doing this 12 years now, national director, and here November, about middle of November, my travel season ended, and boy, I was drained. I was tired, and I really, as I was reflecting on that over the holidays, I'm thinking, I don't quite have the energy that I did when I started.
Yeah, I've noticed that too about me.
Okay.
Yeah. I've noticed that. It's probably true of you too, but yeah, I definitely noticed. I know before I came here, I used to work at the children's home down in Hot Springs, and I would get out and play football with the boys and play games and, run and romp and such. And I noticed a few years after I got here, I don't have that energy anymore. Yeah. I don't know if it's because I'm older or I just don't get the exercise like I used to. But this is probably a painful thing to be talking about right after the holidays, but you do have to watch what you eat. All of the chocolate, fudge, cake, cookies, pie that we had over December. Probably not a good idea, but
it was a good holiday in terms of all of those things.
Yes.
Not a good one when I'm standing on a scale. But it's really more than just our weight, isn't it? Yeah. It's being able to interact and engage with the young men, with our boys.
Yeah.
As we do it, because I don't want to be that leader that sits on the chair all the time, because I just haven't kept up physically, and then those boys are running around and I want to be out there engaged with them. I want to be able to be someone who can do that. So I think an important part as we look at that is as we're, and not only that, but, even for my wife, she tells me all the time, she says, man, when you get to retirement, I don't want you to be some old guy that just sits in a chair and we don't do anything. She's got all these plans of places we're going to go and things we're going to do. And so I have to make sure that physically, and I have noticed that as I work to stay active, it's easier to stay active.
Yeah.
It's when you sit down and we all have seen the people, the individuals, and won't name names or anything like that, but they've kind of just sat down and they've kind of decided, hey, I'm done moving. And for them, unfortunately, life suddenly becomes a very sedentary thing.
Yeah, and sometimes people have legitimate physical ailments, illnesses, disabilities that can prevent them from being really physical. So, I mean, we don't want to belittle that, of course.
Not at all.
So sometimes some people are blessed with good health as they get older and they're able to run and romp and play and go play football with boys out in the field. But there's some that even at a young age aren't able to do that because of whatever, their knees are bad, their back is bad, they were injured, they had an accident, whatever. So, but even in those situations, I think what we're saying is that it's good to be physically engaged with your boys, even in some capacity, even if it's limited. So I may not be able to get out on the field and play football with the boys, but I can still be there. I can be engaged. I can be encouraging. I can be a coach. I can be a referee. I can be, maybe I'm not the guy who runs out for the pass, but I can stand on the line and say, block somebody. There's always some way you can stay engaged. The point is, it's not just that we're trying to be physically healthy. That's important, but we want to make sure that physical health also transposes into physical involvement with the boys.
That's right.
So
I used to, when I was a director of a kids camp, I used to always tell the group leaders, if you play with them, you earn the right to pray with them. Mm-hmm. And so just to the level, and absolutely, we know. I hope that everybody understands that your physical limitations that are there, that's understood.
Yeah, and as we get older, we're all going to get to that point where we can't run and romp like we used to.
Right.
That's just the way God made us. Your body doesn't last forever. There's only so many years in this body, and then it ain't going to work anymore. Yep. So we all have to. That's one thing that I've learned as I've gotten older, is that there are things that I could not do, things that I cannot do now that I used to do, and that's normal and that's natural, both mental and physical. And
I've noticed that. No.
But it also, exactly. But, you've read some things I've written lately. Okay. But also as we get older, it also means we have other opportunities. There are doors that are open. There are things that I can do. There's a way that I can influence the life of a boy today that maybe I couldn't have done 30 or 40 years ago, just because of my experience and wisdom and things, things that now that you didn't know back then. So the key is to always, if we're going to be involved in ministry in any capacity, but we're talking specifically about ministry to boys, if you're going to minister to people, if you're going to minister to boys, you've got to do it within the context of the skills and the ability the Lord has given you.
Right.
And you can't beat yourself up for not being able to do what that guy over there does, because you're not that guy over there. Maybe you were 20 years ago, but that's not who you are today. So you need to work within the context of who you are today and what your abilities are today. And I think when you do that with a good heart, the Lord blesses it, and you can be a blessing to other people.
He absolutely does. And I think the key word here with everything we're going to be talking about today is intentionality.
Yeah.
Where you are today, and just being intentional and making sure that you're leading yourself in these areas. So I don't know. Confession here. Yeah. So you know what I did this year? Starting the first of the year, I'm starting to do Tai Chi.
Do they sell that at Walmart?
Yeah,
is that in the frozen
it's
section? I
I
think it's in the frozen section over there by the broccoli. I'm not sure because I never buy broccoli, I'm thinking it might be over there.
Yeah. So, but supposedly that's supposed to be real good because it's non-impacting. You're not jarring your joints and all of that.
Tai Chi or broccoli?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Both of them. All right.
Broccoli does other things. We won't go there. But anyway, so just the physical. One of the other areas. Okay. So we've talked about the mental. We want to be intentional in making sure that we're focusing and staying cutting edge. I want to read. I want to study. I want to stay, because if I'm not growing, I'm dying, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But also physically. Mm-hmm. The third one that I think is very important, and of course one we talk about all the time, is spiritually.
Yeah.
That's what are your goals? That was the purpose of our swordsman program, that we brought in, that we're intentionally getting into the Word, because through Bible engagement, we discovered that when Barna, I think it was, that did the research, that if you're engaging in your word as little as 10 minutes a day, 4 times a week, it has a significant impact in your lives into the fruit of the Spirit, the manifestations of gentleness, kindness, all of them except patience. That still boggles my mind that one, it doesn't make any difference on.
Yeah.
But just growing spiritually, we have to, because again, we can't go, if we're not going there, we can't bring a boy there.
Yeah, and again, it's just the current of life seems to kind of flow in the other direction.
Yeah.
So if you just become complacent and you just get the idea that, well, I'm just going to show up at church and I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to listen to the sermon and I'm going to maybe worship a little bit and go home and go on with my day. I mean, you can do that, but if you put a minimum effort into your spiritual growth and spiritual health, you're going to get a minimum benefit out of it. Yeah. So you've got to be engaged. You've got to be doing your own devotions. You've got to be reading. You've got to be praying, and investing in other people plays a big role in your own spiritual growth.
Absolutely.
So even though I may be giving to someone else, praying for someone else, helping someone else, it benefits me when I do that. So that's a big part of our spiritual growth is the way we invest in other people.
And today there's so much out there that can, without you having to do a lot of work, I mean, you can listen to podcasts, you can, there's books on audio that you can listen to that can help you. Obviously not to replace your personal prayer life and your personal study of the Word, because those are primary. Those are your foundational, and you have to do that. But even church, don't just go Sunday morning to main service, as good as that is. But even Sunday school class or some of those areas, just find ways to hey, how am I going to move down the road so that at the end of this year, spiritually, I can say I'm closer to Jesus than I was at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. I remember many years ago when I was in college, I found a book at a Christian bookstore. It was by Chuck Swindoll. Chuck Swindoll is a popular
very good
writer.
Yeah.
Used to be the pastor of a church down in Texas, I think. I'm not sure. I think he's getting up there in age now. I don't think he's pastoring anymore. But he wrote this book called Quest for Character that I bought years ago when I was in college. I remember buying it. I remember reading through it in college. It was a great book. But here I am, 40 years later, and I found that book again, and I'm reading through it again. And it's a great book. It's like a daily devotional, but maybe not exactly a daily devotional, but it's the chapters are short enough that I can read a little bit each day. And it just really blesses my heart because it's a great book for just kind of bringing out Scripture the way he does the devotional and ties it in with a certain chapter.
Right.
But I mean, whatever book you use, whatever source you use, and there's all kinds of great authors out there and great books. I think you've just got to find something that feeds your heart and helps you to continue to grow in that way that we're talking about.
That's critical. And when you're doing that, boy, it's so much easier to minister to people.
Yeah.
And help others and all, because it comes out of the overflow. Yeah. It's part of what you are. So we've covered 3 of the areas. We've covered mentally, we've covered physically, we've covered spiritually. There's another area that we always talk about, Rangers.
I think there's another gold point there somewhere.
Gold points. There we go. There's our
the 4
roadmap.
ways a boy and a leader grows.
And of course, the last one is socially.
Yeah. Yep.
What are your thoughts on that, growing socially?
Yeah, and that's really important. And sometimes that's the biggest challenge that we can have for guys when you're busy, you got work, you got things going on. I think we're just kind of hardwired to think more in terms of getting things done and having projects and trying to accomplish something than we are with connecting with people. But yet at the same time, there's something inside of us that says, I need to be connected with people. Like if you're not connected, you feel it after a while. So, you've got to have those relationships. Obviously, most of us in Rangers, we have good relationships with guys in Rangers, and that's great and that's wonderful. But you also want to be connected with people outside this particular ministry. You want to be connected to other people in your church, your youth leaders, your children's ministry leaders, your pastor. Those are all important people, other people in your community. Again, the only way you can invest in the lives of other people and the only way you can overflow, as you mentioned it, into the lives of other people is when you have those relationships and you have those connections.
Absolutely.
So, we want to be careful that we do that in a variety of ways.
Yeah. And so for those of us in Rangers, I mean, we spend a lot of time around Ranger guys, and there's all of that. But I know even in my own personal life, for example, once a month here in Springfield, they have what they call a faith business breakfast. and business leaders from all around the city, the community here get together. And so I intentionally go to be part of that. It has nothing to do with Rangers. Of course, I get to talk, and like this last one that we had just recently, got to meet a guy who was in Royal Rangers when he was a kid. He was just like, and it was great. That's always exciting. But it was just, they help round us out. They help fill us out as an individual, and
especially if they have a big breakfast buffet, that helps you around you out.
That goes back to that physical thing. So
it's that biscuits and gravy. I'm telling you.
There you go. I love biscuits and gravy. But so number one in leading ourselves is the personal area. We have to lead in the personal area. Another area I think that's really critical for us as leaders, and this is a great time for us to talk about at the beginning of the year, is family. Mm-hmm. Part of our responsibility as a man of God is to lead our families, and God calls us to be the priest of the home, and so balance. It's something that we need to be intentional as we think through that. And when you're standing on a solid foundation, when you have your priorities in line, it's a whole lot easier to be balanced in your life, And so one of the things we've talked about, and again, this isn't anything new, but just in a way of reminding us as we talk about leading ourselves. Priorities. Priorities number one, of course, is God. Yeah. We want to make sure our relationship with God is tops, and that's there. But then number two, priority, and as we talk with people, of course, as I'm thrilled that in our Ranger community, and we'll talk about that here in just a second, that we've seen a real upward movement in priorities. But we realize family's number two. Mm-hmm. That has to come before anything else. After that, I believe comes our work, our jobs, because that's how we take care of our families. That's those sort of things. And then comes ministry. And that doesn't mean that ministry gets leftovers or sloppy seconds, but it does mean that that we recognize and we don't sacrifice any of the ones above it, for that. I remember when years ago, we used to have that term Ranger widow. Remember that? Mm-hmm. You remember that?
Yeah.
And guys would sometimes it was almost bragging rights that, hey, you know what, we're always doing ministry and all of that. And while there is something about that, there is something sad about that too. I remember years ago, shortly after I became national director, so this has been about 12 years ago, I moved to Springfield. And one of my things early on was I wanted to find Johnny Barnes' grave. I knew he was buried here in Springfield somewhere, and I didn't know exactly where. And so I started doing some research, and you can go to a lot of these cemeteries, and they have websites, and you can start to search for names and all of that stuff. And I found the graveyard that he was at, and I found his name and all. And when I opened it up, there was a memorial page that they do for that. And what struck me was the second entry on that memorial page was a wife who on there, she made this statement, and it captured my heart. And I thought, as national commander, I'm going to make sure we prioritize families. But the statement she said, and it was tongue in cheek. She wasn't being serious about it. It was sarcastic, actually. She said, "Thank you for creating a ministry that takes the man away from the family," or something like that. And I thought, how tragic. Now I'm thrilled that that's not the case today. Mm-hmm. As we talk, our leaders are prioritizing and doing that. But the importance of family, and so we really want to be intentional about making sure family is something we're focusing on and we're looking at and all that. And then with family, I think there's even an order inside of that. Wife comes number one. Our kids come number two. Because your
grandkids kind of come before, wife, then
yeah, you're in that
grandkids,
stage now, aren't you?
I've got a couple grandkids.
John's a lot older than me, and so he's. But yeah, because your wife, you made a commitment to her till death do you part. Your kids, guess what? They're going to grow up and get it. As soon as they start hitting 11, 12, 13, they're already starting to stretch their wings, and getting away. It's kind of neat that later on, as they come out of their college years and all that, all of a sudden they start to value relationships and they start coming back again. But our wife is the greatest priority in the family. Mm-hmm. And then our children. And so just really, what are some ways that you prioritize your wife? What are some things that you do, or even your family? How do you do that in your context, John?
Yeah, like we've talked about, you have to just set aside time. You have to be intentional about setting aside time. Yeah. Because managing your calendar can be kind of like digging a hole in the sand. If you don't fill it with something, it's going to fill back in really quick. Yeah. And so that's why you've got to be able to block out that time. And I've been glad glad that my wife has been able to get more involved with some of our ranger activities that we're involved with now, more than she was able to before. When our kids were little, she really wasn't able to do that much because we had 4 kids, and it was a full-time job just taking care of the kids. But then now they're all grown. They're all out of the house. They're young adults now, having kids. And I'm a grandpa. By the way, did I mention that? Did I mention? I've got pictures. And I get pictures. If anyone would like to see pictures, I could
email John, and he'll send you a lot of pictures.
But anyway, So I mean, it's just as life changes and you go through different phases that the way that you can spend time together. It's going to change over time.
Yes.
But so we're kind of going through that empty nest time right now.
Yes.
We still have a dog. I just don't have 4 totally empty. But anyway, and grandkids. Did I mention that we have grandkids? Anyway, So I mean, that I agree. You definitely want to prioritize your relationship with her and make her the priority of everything you do. Really.
Yep. When our kids were young and they were still at home, this is elementary school and all of that. I remember Cindy and I had an evening where once a week we have this evening where we would get the kids to bed, and then we would sit down, and for 45 minutes, I mean, that was the target, was 45 minutes. Usually it ended up being longer. We just sat and talked. We were very intentional about that, We couldn't always go off on and do date night or something like that, because when you're young, and you have a young family, and there's a lot of things that come into play there. But we did once a week. Thursday night was our night, and in summer we'd sit out on the patio, on concrete slab that was out there behind our house, and we just talk or whatever. But again, it's being going. There's that word intentionality again. Mm-hmm. It's being intentional to say I want to prioritize her, and we know our wives. That's critical for them. There was a book out, His Needs, Her Needs, and in that they quoted out of 250,000 women that they surveyed about that was one of their top 2 needs, is to be romanced, or just to know that, hey, I still matter to my husband, and so that takes some intentionality to do that. Yeah. So spending time and doing that.
And powwow could be a really romantic place to take your wife, by the way. I mean, we've got great experiences there with her in the concession stand and me over in registration. Man, that's a romantic. Okay, well, maybe not entirely that, but
But there's things you can do when you go. I've talked to leaders who've told me that every time that they go to a ranger event, on the way home, their wife knows that they're picking up a bundle of flowers. Yeah. And then there's a night out that they're going to give her. And she gets to sometimes pick where they're going or whatever. But she knows that if there's a ranger weekend, that next week there's going to be an evening that is going to be their evening to go out and do something special. Yeah, and nice. So doing smart things like that, that way what it does. When I look at that and I think, man, I imagine that wife, that ranger's wife, she looks forward to him going away because she knows there's something special coming for her, and it's just doing things like that. Yeah. I remember years ago when we were early on, and I don't do. Of course, I travel way more now. I'm with my job, what I do here, but I used to always put little notes all over the place, and that's I probably need to get back to that. I'm sitting here making a mental note to myself, but I would intentionally I'd put something in her closet or I'd put something on her pillow so that that night when she go to bed, there's a little note that just simply said, "Hey, I'm thinking about you. I love you. Sleep good," or something. It's just silly things like that. But they mean a lot. Yeah. It just lets her know that we're prioritizing. So there's little things like that we can do that help prioritize our spouses.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of get myself in trouble there sometimes because there's a certain kind of candy bar that Amanda likes, and sometimes I'll get it for her and I'll leave it on the dash in her car, in her vehicle. I mean, when it's hot, know what I'm about. But then, she loves the candy bar, but she's angry at me because I bought the candy bar because she doesn't want to eat it because it's like, that's a whole lot of sugar. That's so she'll eat the whole thing. And like, am I good or am I bad? I'm not sure. Yeah. But
And we know that there's heavy seasons of ministry. Yeah. There's heavy times. And that maybe leads us into the calendar. But when we know that there's going to be times where the season there's going to be a lot of activities, powwow, camp, just different things like that. Be intentional to really prioritize and say, hey, before I go into that, I'm going to spend some extra time. because, someone one time described it as you're building up credits. And then when you go do these things away, you're spending some of those credits. And as long as you have more credits than you have, debit, you're doing okay. And so that's an important thing. What do you do to prioritize your calendar? Let's jump in. We only have a few minutes left, but how do you that's the other part, leading ourselves, because time is such a big deal. And calendars or anything can take over a lot of our time. And so we have to be intentional on setting time aside for that.
How do I prioritize it?
Yeah. What are some things you do to make sure that you're leading your calendar and your calendar is not leading you?
Of course, you always have to, in any organization, any level that you work at, you've got to define what are those things that are the most significant.
Yes.
You've got some things that have actual deadlines that you have to set those first, or things that are going to take more time. Obviously, I work in the national office, but I'm also working on the district level. So we've got events there that I have to manage as well as what's going on there in the national. So it's just, your calendar can really get full, especially when you have multiple layers, and then you're involved in your church. I'm involved in activities there. So you got to kind of figure out what are those things that are the most urgent, and then what are those things that are really, you've got to be careful not to overlook those things that are important, even if they're not necessarily urgent.
That's a
good point. And a lot of that is driven by just understanding what your priorities are. What's our ultimate goal? What's the big picture? Because the big picture is the thing that drives everything that you do.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get so busy just kind of replicating the same events on the calendar year after year that you can lose sight of what are we really trying to accomplish. Because and you got to constantly be in that mode of reevaluating and evaluating every event and every activity that you do, because maybe something that we started doing 10 years ago was effective then, but not as effective now. So we got to figure out we just need to ensure that we're always doing the right things and putting priorities on the right things.
So one of the things I do is before I start filling up my yearly calendar, I always sit down with Cindy and it's like, okay, what do you want to do for vacation this year? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And so I learned that from doing it wrong, because the first few years of ministry, man, I'd fill up calendar, and then all of a sudden, we're 2/3 of the way through, and she's like, are we going on vacation? Are we doing something this year? And it's like, and now I'm trying to figure out how to shoehorn something in. Again, that doesn't talk about priority. And so what I do now is, because we collect speaking requests all year long. I do. Sandra collects those. And then in October, we sit down and I then put in my calendar. I structured them into my calendar and all of that. But before I ever got there to do that, Cindy and I sat down and was like, when do you want to go on vacation? And there's some big events that we don't have control over, like General Council or AGLC or some of those kind of things that we're all part of there and do that. But then I'll set, where do you want to go? When do you want to do something? And now once that's established, now it's easy for me to fill the rest of that in. Not to the point, you keep margin in your calendar, obviously, so you have space, because there's always things that come up that you didn't plan for and all of those. But that does become an important piece. Yeah. As you do that. So anyway, so time-wise here, we need to kind of wrap this thing up, but the whole purpose of today's podcast is just to encourage you as you start going into this year. How are you leading yourself? How are you taking control of the things that are happening? Because there are priorities, and in order for us to be able to do that, we want to make sure that I think in those three areas specifically, ourselves personally and all the pieces that we talked about there, our family, and then with our time. Those are, we could also have added finance into there, but that's another, we'll do that for another topic. But do prioritize those and be intentional about that and say, hey, this is what I want to do. These are goals I want to accomplish. And I think that'll help us along the way. Any last thoughts?
No, I think I agree. That sounds good.
All right. Well, guys, thank you again for listening to our podcast. We hope this was beneficial to you. We had fun doing it, and we always do. But we appreciate each and every one of you guys, what you do for the ministry, what you do in your jobs and in your outposts, I should say. And again, as always, thank you. Thank you for making a difference in the life of those boys. Because of you, the trajectory of those young men, eternity will tell what happened. And so we appreciate each and every one of you. God bless you guys. Look forward to hearing or speaking to you next month as we come to you with another Ranger podcast.